I'm the bad guy. I'm the victim here. I'm the one who's been abused. I'm the one who's trying to come forward and do something about
Thousands. Not a rumor, not an exaggeration. A man who spent 30 years seconds being called crazy, being laughed off stages, being buried by the very machine he was trying to expose sitting there, voice cracking, saying thousands.
It's an 8-armed octopus. And if you take just out, that arm will grow back. You have to take the head.
One head. And then in a moment that nobody in mainstream media wanted to cover, Jim Caviezel, the man who walked away from Hollywood rather than stay seconds quiet, heard what Corey Feldman had been saying for 3 decades.
Are we going to let our children go? And that's a question.
And he broke.
That question wasn't rhetorical. And by the time this video is over, you're going to understand exactly why he asked it and exactly who he was asking it about. Corey Feldman was 11 years old when the industry first got its hands on him. By the time he was a teenager, he was one of the most recognizable child actors on the planet. The Goonies, Stand By Me, The Lost Boys, a kid whose face was on lunchboxes and magazine covers. And behind every single one of those posters, behind every red carpet appearance, behind every studio executive shaking his hand and telling him he had a future, something else was happening, something that nobody with a camera or a platform wanted to discuss. He wasn't just being managed, he was being passed around, and the people doing the passing weren't low-level predators operating in the shadows. They were connected, they were protected, they had names that opened doors in every corner of the entertainment industry and beyond.
They had names that opened doors in every corner of the entertainment industry and beyond. The circle of older men all had either their own power or connections to great power that surrounded themselves
not just industry access, not just Hollywood relationships, connections upward to people whose protection didn't come from a studio contract or a talent agency. It came from somewhere much higher on the food chain than that. And for 30 years, Corey Feldman tried to make the world hear this. He went on talk shows, he wrote books, he gave interviews, he cried on camera, he pleaded with journalists, he sat across from hosts who smiled politely and pivoted to the next segment the moment things got uncomfortable. They called him unstable. They called him attention-seeking. They called him a has-been trying to stay relevant. They called him everything except the one thing he actually was, right? Because here's what 30 years of consistent, detailed, cross-referenced testimony actually looks like when you step back and look at the full picture. It doesn't look like a conspiracy theory. It looks like a man describing a system so powerful, so deeply embedded in the cultural infrastructure of this country that the system itself became the mechanism of his discredit. You don't laugh off someone who is lying. You laugh off someone whose truth is too dangerous to take seriously.
So deeply embedded in the cultural infrastructure of this country that the system itself became the mechanism of his discredit. You don't laugh off someone who is lying. You laugh off someone whose truth is too dangerous to take seriously. Thousands of people in
Think about the architecture of that question. Thousands of people who were in the same rooms, who heard the same conversations, who witnessed the same things, and every single one of them, every single one chose silence. That is not awkwardness. That is not coincidence. That is a system, a purchased, organized, maintained system of silence built by people with enough power to end careers, destroy reputations, and according to multiple documented sources, end lives. But even within that system of enforced silence, 2 men refused to stop talking. One of them spent $1.3 million of his own money he could not afford to lose to make a documentary that named names. The other walked away from a mainstream Hollywood career entirely, rather than pretend he didn't know what he knew. And the moment those 2 men's stories began to intersect, the moment the threads they had each been pulling for years began to connect to the same knot, is the moment that the people at the top of that octopus started paying very close attention. To understand why Jim Caviezel's emotional reaction to what Feldman revealed matters so much, you first need to understand who Jim Caviezel actually is in this context. Because most people think of him as an actor, the guy who played Jesus in The Passion of the Christ, the guy who spent years in Hollywood working his way up the industry ladder. That's true, but it's about a quarter of the story. For the last decade, Jim Caviezel has been quietly, and then not so quietly, embedding himself in one of the most dangerous activist spaces that exists in this country, the fight against child trafficking, not as a celebrity donor who writes a check and gets their name on a gala program, as someone who studied these networks, their structures, their methods, the profiles of the people who run them with the focus focus of a man who has seen what they do to children and cannot unknow it. He starred in Sound of Freedom, a film based on the true story of Tim Ballard, a former Homeland Security agent who left his government career to run underground operations rescuing children from trafficking networks. And that film, the one about saving children, the one with the most straightforwardly sympathetic premise imaginable, Hollywood didn't want it to exist.
Agent who left his government career to run underground operations rescuing children from networks.
Every studio. Look,
and that film, the one about saving children, Hollywood didn't want it to exist.
In 3 years.
Every major studio, every major network,
not asked,
stay away from it.
Stay away from a film about saving children. Let that settle for a moment. Because the coordination, that instruction required the number of people at the number of levels across the number of competing organizations who had to receive that message and comply with it completely. That is not one bad executive with a personal agenda. That is an industry-wide response. And the people capable of generating that kind of coordinated response are not mid-level producers arguing over script notes in a conference room. They are the people who sit at the absolute top of the cultural infrastructure, the gatekeepers. Caviezel pushed through anyway. Sound of Freedom got picked up by Angel Studios. And when it finally hit theaters, the public responded. Over $200 million at the box office. The audience wanted to see it. Hollywood just didn't want them to. And then something happened during a screening that Caviezel says changed everything he understood about what he was up against. The audience screamed it not once, multiple times, at that exact moment in the film. And for Caviezel, a man who had already been studying these networks, already drawing connections, already naming patterns in interviews that were getting millions of views, that moment was a confirmation. He started speaking publicly about the octopus, about the 8 arms, about the head.